So we've been asking the question, what does it look like, especially now as we approach relaunching in-person gatherings and we get back to some sense of normality? What does it look like to be a Christian, a Christ follower, someone who authentically and radically and passionately and practically follows Jesus in 21st century Ireland? Last week we kicked off the series with the first message. Today, in part 2, I've entitled the message, Where Do We Go Now? Where do we go now? Which whenever I hear that I often think of that famous Guns N' Roses song, Sweet Child of Mine. Shout out to all the GNR fans. But this week then following on from last week's message, was called Do You Follow? We're asking the question, where do we go now? Now again, if you missed last week's, simply go on to lighthousechurch.ie and you can click on messages and you can find last week's message, because this series does build on itself every single week, so it's important that you get each block in. But what we learned last week was, number one, being a sinner does not disqualify you from following Jesus. If you're watching right now and you're a skeptic, or you're not a person of faith, or maybe you're just, someone who just thinks that, God could never want me, love me, use me because I'm a sinner, understand that what we learned last week is that being a sinner does not disqualify you from following Jesus. It's a prerequisite, okay? We're all sinners. Number two, the second thing we learned was being an unbeliever does not disqualify you from following Jesus. Why? Because nobody fully believed in Jesus before they followed him. I mean, even the early disciples didn't really know the full measure of who he was as they were actively following him, some for over 3 years. Okay, by the end, it became really apparent to them who Jesus really was, the Messiah, Son of God. But when their journey began, a lot of them didn't fully understand who he was. So if you're watching right now, you're like, I'm not a believer and I'm a sinner. Or maybe I'm not a believer, not even believe in sin. Either way, being a sinner or being an unbeliever does not disqualify you. It doesn't count you out. It doesn't preclude you, exclude you from the opportunity to consider following Jesus. The third thing that we learned very importantly is that Jesus' invitation to follow him isn't an invitation into religion, but an invitation into relationship. Jesus' invitation is an invitation to relationship. Religion, we learned last week, says that the message of religion, the rally call is change and you can join us. If you just get your act together, clean yourself up, if you were curse less and get rid of those habits and get away from those people and make yourself more presentable and put on even the expression, your Sunday best, right? Which, a statement even kind of incorporates this idea that you have to put on something to go to church because it's Sunday. If you change and be more like us, you can join us. But the gospel message, the good news of Christ, what Jesus came to show us is the opposite. Religion says change and you can join us, but Jesus says join me, join us, follow me, and you will see real lasting change in your life. And when we do get together in just a few weeks in person, what you'll realize is that there's a lot of people in our environments, in our locations, who would testify and say, I didn't decide to become a Christian and do all this work on myself to make myself better. I just started following Jesus, and Jesus worked in my life to change, to make me happier and healthier, and to make me better. The bottom line we discovered last week is you and I, we have been invited to follow. And that's what this whole series is about. The idea that we have been invited to follow, and the underlying question simply is, am I following? Even if I'm not believing, even if I'm not obeying, even if I'm not, where I need to be, am I following? So today then, part 2, we're carrying on from that and asking the question, where? Where are we following? Okay, Jesus, you invite me to follow you, but where do we go now, right? Where do we go? And of course, there's a little bit of a misconception about what it means to follow Jesus. There's a bit of a misconception around what it means to be a follower. And we see this kind of characterized all the time. Sometimes you can even pick it up by reading only one portion of scripture, not the thing in its entirety. A great example of this is found in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 4, verse 18 and 22. Now, most of you are aware there's 4 Gospels, right? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Well, Matthew and John were both eyewitnesses. They were part of Jesus' group. They were part of the original band of disciples. They were there. They saw it. They experienced it. They felt it, but from different perspectives, as we all experience life from our own perspective. Then Mark and Luke weren't actually there, but Mark recorded the Apostle Peter's eyewitness account. So Mark basically got a first hand version, and then he was the one that put it into paper. Whereas Luke was a historian, primarily writing to a Western, kind of more Hellenistic, Greek thinking world, our world basically, a secular world. And he went and interviewed people and lined up dates and facts as historians do and put together his account. Now Matthew was primarily writing to a Jewish audience who believed in God, had faith in God, understood God. He took for granted that a lot of the terms, a lot of the kind of background information they knew. So when we read Matthew's, and what we're going to do today is we're going to look at Matthew's account of where do we go now, and then we're going to look at Luke's account and see how to compare and maybe find some clarity for us as to how do we take our next step in this great invitation of following Jesus. So again, in verse 18, and all of today's notes in the Bible app by YouVersion, if you want to track along with me, download the Bible app by YouVersion, click on more, click on events, find Lighthouse Church Dublin, Lighthouse Church Navan, and all of today's notes will be there. Verse 18, as Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, very important, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake because they were fishermen. And back then, fishermen fished with nets as they do in the open seas today. Verse 19, Jesus said, come follow me and I will send you out to fish for people. Okay? And verse 20, at once they left their nets and followed him. End of story. I mean, does that sound bizarre? Like just pause for a second. This is where I think the wheels fall off this thing. What does it mean to follow Jesus? Where do we follow him to? Well, we open Matthew's account, and of course, he's speaking to a Jewish audience, understands a rabbi's invitation, what it means, the metaphorical, side of all this, the history. And so it's almost like Jesus just walking by the lake upon first reading and sees these two guys and says, hey, you guys who fish. And they're like, us? He's like, yeah, you. Come follow me and I'll make you fish for men. Which you're probably thinking, what does that even mean? And for some reason, they just dropped their business. Their fishing wasn't their hobby. It was their job. It was their business. They dropped their business and just followed him, right? Now, if you're reading this from a kind of skeptical point of view, you're thinking, this is crazy. I mean, this random dude is walking by in sandals and invites these two grown men to follow him so they can fish for people, and they do. Right? This is the moment where a lot of you non-believers push back and go, see, this is why I can't believe this stuff. It's just like if anything, this should be a story of stranger danger. I mean, here's this random man, okay, walking by, inviting these two young men just to follow to fish for people, right? And what's worse, it doesn't even end there, because in verse 21, it says, going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John, who's the Apostle John who wrote the Gospel of John. And they were in a boat with their father Zebedee, preparing their nets, and Jesus calls to them, hey you! They're like, who, us? Yeah, you! And they go, what's up? And he says, follow me! And verse 22, immediately they left their boat, left their father, and followed him. I mean, can you imagine poor Zebedee? Like, from Matthew's account, it seems like Zebedee's out with his sons, doing his stuff. This stranger walks by, hey guys! Hey! Follow me! Okay. They dropped their business, abandoned their father with the business, which is kind of awkward, and off they go. And the problem is, this is how most of us perceive or think about what a Christian is. It's like this weird, random, magical, calling where we just drop everything and there's no real information, there's no real basis, there's no real structure, and it's kind of only crazy people can follow Jesus. And again, I appreciate it because I came to faith from a skeptical viewpoint. I wasn't someone who was raised in this kind of faith, someone who was raised to love Jesus or understand his word. And so when you read that at first glance, think, man, that isn't spiritual. I mean, that's unrealistic. That's borderline irresponsible. Just to leave your father, abandon him, to leave your business. Like, that's just so bizarre. And what happens is we try to either discount, discredit, or change or distort the story to suit our reality. But the truth is, my friends, from Matthew's account, that is what happened. However, it is not all that happened, okay? And this is where we thank God we have four Gospels, because we have four perspectives of the same story. Well, in this case, two of this story in particular. And so, if we look at the book of Luke, Luke comes a couple of years later and interviews all the disciples and Zebedee and maybe some people who were there that day, and says, what was it like when Jesus called, Peter and Andrew and James and John? And then he put together this kind of more scrutinized account with skeptics in mind, knowing that he was writing to Roman, skeptical, Western, Hellenistic, Greek thinking, knowledge-driven audience. This kind of like, unbelieving audience. And so he kind of tries to set some context. Now, in context, here's what we know. We know that this event took place at the Sea of Galilee, okay? The Sea of Galilee, as you can see here from the map, was north of Jerusalem. You can see Jerusalem. If you look just south of Jerusalem, that's the Dead Sea, okay? You follow the little blue line. That's the River Jordan, of course, where John baptized and so on and so forth. You follow the River Jordan north, you see a city called Capernaum. Okay, that big circle, it may look like a lake, but it's a sea. It's a really big body of water. I have a picture here of what the Sea of Galilee looks like. And here's a boat, kind of like a boat that would have existed in Jesus' time. And even today, you can go to the Sea of Galilee and you can do tours. And what would happen was rabbis, teachers, this is very common in the first century, would, try to find natural places of amplification, places that help their voice carry. And because Jesus was teaching and usually teaching crowds, one of the places they would go is they would go to, a kind of not so much a beach, but like a cliff edge, or, somewhere there was rocks, a hill, and the topography would serve as like a natural amphitheater that would help carry his voice and allow his listeners to help him better. This is very important because when we look at Luke's account, Luke chapter 5 and verse 1, we're going to get more detail and we're going to find out why this is relevant. It starts off by saying this: one day, Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret. Now you're thinking, hang on a second, I thought it was the Sea of Galilee. Yes, we are, but one comes from the Hebrew version or Aramaic version of the name, the other comes from the Latin, Greek kind of version for the name. Most audiences in the world may find this confusing, but we as the Irish, we totally get it because every one of our road signs has two names, right? The original kind of Irish word and the anglicized version of that word. So it's the Sea of Galilee, same lake. And we're told that people were crowding around him, listening to the word of God. That's a very different picture, Matthew, okay? This isn't stranger danger. This isn't some dude with a beard and sandals walking along the beach calling random people to follow him so they can find men who are fish or fishmen, okay? This is very different. We're told Jesus is doing what most rabbis did at that time, which was very normal. He's teaching a crowd of people using the natural topography to help amplify his voice so they can hear him. There was no microphones or speakers. There was no Bluetooth and no iPods back then. And so he has this crowd, okay, around him, and the crowd's growing, and he's getting pushed further and further and further to the edge of the lake, which is a very important detail. Perhaps even has his feet in the water at this point. And notice what everyone is doing. Everyone is listening. This is so important. Now, again, if you're watching and you're a skeptic or you're an unbeliever, someone who's been out of faith for a while and trying to find your way back, and you're thinking, man, how do I follow God? I mean, what's the first thing? What does He require of me? Should I give money? Should I go to a service? Like what should I do? All following. Watch this. All following. Following always begins with listening. Following always begins with listening. Now, if you're watching and you're a Christ follower, you're someone of faith, you have a relationship with God, let me also say this. Following not only begins with listening, but true following of Jesus is maintained by listening, okay? I was just speaking to someone the other day and asking them, like, what is God saying to you? And they were going through a difficult season, but they were saying, I feel the Holy Spirit is saying this. This person's been a Christian for many years. This person knows the Bible, knows the Word, and it shows us that not only does following begin with listening, but our following is maintained by our ability to perceive, discern, hear, what is God saying to me now? And the thing is this, people say, I can't hear God. Very often, it's not because God isn't speaking. God is always speaking to us, friends, always. The challenge is are we listening? And too many of us, too often, are so busy running around trying to be our own God, aren't we? In our own circumstance, trying to manufacture the outcomes that we desire in our career, in our education, with our relationships, with our health, that we kind of have worked the voice of God out of our lives. But my prayer for you, my prayer for me, my prayer for us today is that as we take this time to lean in, this time to listen, that we would hear, that you would hear God's voice for your life. So Jesus, this rabbi, this teacher, is at the lakeside teaching people. Verse 2, we're told that he saw at the water's edge 2 boats, okay? Very important, 2 boats left there by the fishermen who were washing their nets, okay? So again, to understand the context, we've got to go a little bit into the whole fishing thing. So again, these weren't pleasure boats. These weren't people on the weekend going out as a form of hobby to fish. These are 2 professional fishing boats. And we're told that Jesus saw these 2 boats together. We're going to discover in a moment that one was owned by Peter and Andrew, and one was owned by Zebedee. Okay, and obviously his 2 sons, James and John. And these fishermen were washing their nets. Now, why were they washing their nets? Well, because in the first century and in the Sea of Galilee, because it was a sea, it was deep, what would happen was during the day when it was really hot, because the temperature could be 35, 40 degrees, the fish would go down deep into the cool part of the sea. But at night time, as the temperature dropped, the fish would come to the surface. So fishermen in the Sea of Galilee in the first century would fish at night, because their mechanism, their mode of fishing was to cast a net into the lake, okay, and kind of drag the net up, get as many fish as they could during the night, come back to shore in the morning, process those fish for sale, because there was no refrigerators, there was no freezers. It was like you catch it tonight, it's sold tomorrow in the market. And then you'd spend most of the morning mending, fixing where the net was broken, got nabbed in something, cleaning them from all the grime and dirt, because that net was your livelihood. I mean, if you're a carpenter, if you're a tradesperson, or maybe you're an architect, or maybe you're an artist or a musician, your guitar, your computer, your canvas, your paintbrushes, your tools, your van, they just aren't part of the job. They're the means of the job. If you don't have your tools, if your tools are not working well, not taken care of, then you can't do your job and you can't get paid. So in this first century world, these nets represented everything. They were as important as a boat, because the boat could get you out into the water, but you can't catch fish without your nets. So these fishermen would fish at night where it was cool. They fished with nets, not rods, and there was a need for constant maintenance. So what we know straight away from historical context is Jesus is teaching these people, and somewhere a bit down the beach, maybe very close to him, are these 2 boats, and these fishermen have spent all night working, and they're now mending the nets. Then this crazy thing happens, because, and I love this, because this is how God works. Jesus kind of steps into the life, the story, the day, the business of one of these fishermen. We're told in verse 3, he got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, that is Peter, and asked him to put out a little from shore. Then he sat down and taught the people from the boat. And again, you're wondering what's going on here. Well, of course, there's something more than just the boat. Jesus obviously is looking to break into Simon Peter's life and reveal himself to him. But at the same time, there's also a very practical thing happening. Again, think about the topography and the amplification of sound. By getting in the boat and being slightly elevated to the crowd who are sitting below him and going a little bit out, his voice would travel along the water and up the hillside and would allow more people to hear his voice. So again, nothing out of the ordinary just yet. Everything's, I know it's strange for us looking back, 2,000 years, those of us who live in a world where we order food and just eat, and fish is something that usually is wrapped in breadcrumbs and called finger. But in the first century, everything's normal. This would happen. People would go a little bit from the shore. They'd be in an elevated position. Their voice would carry, and they'd be able to teach. And so Jesus is in Simon's boat. Simon, possibly Andrew, with him. And here's a very, very important note. Don't miss this, okay? As Jesus sat to teach the people, we don't know how long it lasted. It could have went on for hours, okay? As Jesus sitting in Simon's boat teaching the people, Peter, Andrew, James, John, and possibly even Zebedee were there listening. Again, Matthew, that's a kind of an important detail, okay? It wasn't like the first time these guys saw Jesus as he was walking along the lake. Hi, follow me. Like, there was a period of time where they were able to sit under the teaching, the ministry of Jesus, and they were listening. There was a context here, okay? Now, in verse 4, the story continues. When he'd finished speaking, we don't know how long he spoke for, okay? He said to Simon, "Put out into deep water and let down your nets for a catch." Now, here's the point in the story where it starts to get a little bit strange. Because, number one, people did not fish in the daytime. It wasn't a done thing. I mean, that's kind of weird. Fishermen fish at night, okay? Number two, Jesus was either a carpenter or a rabbi. So he's like a pastor, a priest, or a carpenter, or a pastor and priest who, came from a carpentry background. In either sense, he's not a fisherman, okay? And if you're someone who has a profession, you've worked in the trade your whole life, you've got a degree, one of the most annoying things in the world is when someone who has no idea about your profession or trade tries to give you advice, right, about what you should be doing to better your profession and trade, right? I mean, it's very frustrating, and it takes a lot of humility to be able to listen and learn, because I believe we can learn something from everyone. But nonetheless, it's a moment of awkwardness because Jesus is obviously asking Peter, in particular, to take a practical step, but something profoundly spiritual is about to take place. Now, we look back with the benefit of hindsight, and we see ultimately who Peter became, but here's the key point. Before Peter could ever follow Jesus in a way that changed the world, we know the Apostle Peter was one of the original disciples that helped change the world. Before he could ever follow Jesus in a way that changed their world, Peter would have to follow Jesus in a way that challenged and changed his world. I'll say it again. Before Peter could ever follow Jesus in a way that challenged and changed the world, Peter would have to learn to follow Jesus in a way that challenged and changed his world. And in this context, it's will you go out into the deep and put down those nets that you've worked on? Again, Jesus isn't asking Peter, and by virtue of the story, he isn't asking you to take a massive leap. I mean, it isn't drop your nets and follow me, as it seems it was in Matthew's account, okay? Here we have the detail. He wasn't asking Peter to make this massive leap. Rather, following Jesus always begins with a small step, often a very singular small step. See, Jesus doesn't ask you, non-believer, skeptic, or backslidden person, to take this huge leap of faith. He just asks you to trust him, take a singular small step. Now, in verse 5, there's a natural objection. We've already seen it coming, haven't we? Because we talked about the nets. Simon answered, not Lord, not God, not Messiah. He used the term master. And the term master was a well-used term in that culture again that meant like sir, kind sir. It was a gesture, a term of endearment, of respect, not one of worship, not one. I mean, it wasn't like Peter is looking at Jesus the Messiah. As far as Peter's concerned, he's a rabbi. He's obviously a very good rabbi. If lots of people are showing up in the middle of the day to listen to him by a lake. And so Peter has a degree of respect for him. Obviously, he's heard his teaching. He's heard his heart. So Peter respects Jesus. He's interested in what Jesus say. So he uses the endearing term master, but not God. So Peter's following. Watch this. Peter's invitation to follow didn't come necessarily because he believed fully in who Jesus was. It was because he was listening to something, and Jesus invited him to take a singular small step. But Peter's objection is, because we always have objections, don't we? We all have objections. Jesus calls us, even as Christians, even as seasoned, veteran, mature Christians, the Holy Spirit speaks in our heart and says, follow me. And the first thing we throw up is not like a hooray, but a hang on, because there's objections. And Peter's objection is, Master, he said, we've worked hard. We've worked hard. It wasn't like we just worked, okay? We worked hard. It was a difficult night. It was a hard night. It was one of the hardest nights, and we haven't caught anything. Which I think this is very important, because there's this moment of tension. Because Jesus is still in front of the crowd. Peter is in the boat with Andrew. James, John, Zebedee are probably right beside him. Jesus has taught. Peter's been patient. He's been kind. He's allowed Jesus to use his boat. He's been listening. And now Jesus, the rabbi / carpenter, is asking the seasoned fisherman to go back out into the open, okay, to take the very nets he's just spent all morning cleaning, and in front of everyone who can see him, okay, in the middle of the day, do something that wasn't done. I mean, it's weird. It'd be weird for Peter to go and fish during it. So there's the sense of crowd dynamic, like, what will people think? But then I think it's also interesting, there's this confidence piece, isn't there? Because Peter didn't just say, Master, we've worked hard all night. He said, we didn't catch anything. So it's almost like Peter saying, even if I was a great fisherman and had any chance, this would be a big ask. But we worked hard all night. We don't have a single fish to show. So you're asking the wrong guy. There's, down the road there's this other family. Like, they've got all these kids who are freaks of nature. They're all super intelligent and super photogenic and, win every prize in school and always come first. And their parents are the perfect marriage. And maybe if you go and ask those guys, they're so good, maybe they can defy the norm and catch some fish in the day. But I'm not good enough. I'm not able. I have nothing to offer. I've worked hard at what's supposed to be the thing that I'm good at, and I have fallen short and I have failed. So there's tension going on here, because for Peter to answer and to respond to Jesus' invitation, take a small step of faith, he's going to overcome the pressure of what will people think and overcome the pressure of my confidence, my own ability. And again, at this point, I can imagine Peter rolling his eyes and thinking, carpenters. I mean, yeah, carpenter. What does this guy even know about fishing? But something cataclysmic, something huge, something profound happens in this little moment of dialogue. This is moment that marked the beginning of Peter and Jesus' relationship, because for whatever reason, from whatever Peter has heard until this point, something's happened where Peter decides, even though I've worked hard, even though I've already been inconvenienced by, you teaching for my boat and I'm late, and even though there's the challenge of the crowd and my confidence, he says this is very important. He says, but because you say so, there's something, I don't really know who he is, I don't fully get it, I don't fully believe it, I don't fully embrace it, because there's something there, I'm going to take a simple step of faith and let down my nets. Because you say so, I will let down the nets, Peter says. And it's so interesting because he does this not because he wants to, right? I mean, oftentimes Jesus invites us to follow him, and it's not because we want to, right? It's not because we understand why. Peter didn't understand why. And it's not even because, like Peter's saying, I because you said I'll do it, but not because I want to, because I understand why. And not even because I know you're God, because he didn't, but because I've listened enough to know that maybe you know something I don't know. This is crucial, because if you're watching thinking, man, I don't know if I really believe everything about God. I don't know if I can embrace the Bible. I don't know if I can, believe everything you guys believe. But there's something about Jesus that I can't shake off. Something about just this that I don't understand. And it's almost like, because I know you know something I don't know, I'm willing to take this little step. And of course, we understand that Jesus' request to put out the boat wasn't a practical request alone. It was an invitation. And very often when you sense that God is saying, hey, watch church today, or hey, get in a connect group, or when you feel that God is drawing you to himself, it's not just a practical request to get some religious act out of you. It's an invitation. At the core of every invitation, at the core of the invitation that God is giving you through my voice today, is a very simple yet incredibly profound and possibly life-changing question. And the question is, friend, here's the question. You ready? Here's your question. Listen up. Will you trust me? Hey, Peter, I'm a rabbi. I'm a carpenter. I just talk for a living. But I'm asking you to put out your boat to the deep and let down nets. And in that request, in that invitation, is the question, will you trust me? Peter, will you take the risk and take a small step? Will you go against the fear of what will people think and your own lack of confidence? And will you not trust in them or trust in me, or trust in yourself, but will you trust in me? Don't trust in what people's opinion of it is. Don't trust in what your own ability or confidence, but will you trust in me, and will you take this small step? Which I think points to a very important lesson. The lesson is, we should never ever underestimate what one small, seemingly insignificant step of obedience can lead to over a lifetime of following. This was Peter's first step in a lifetime of steps that would follow Jesus. This is the beginning of Peter's relationship with Jesus. Now, we know Peter is an important dude, and if you come from a Roman Catholic background, you know Peter is very important according to that tradition. But can you imagine if Peter had said, no, I worked hard all night, you're a carpenter, you're a pastor, I've already given you, I've been generous, I've been good now, come on, it's time to move along, go find someone else. Can you imagine like what that would have meant for us and our faith? Those who know the Bible, think about, the whole Jesus' arrest and Gethsemane and Peter denying him and Jesus reinstating him. Think about Acts chapter 2. Think about, the day of Pentecost. Think about Acts chapter 3 and him and John. Think about all of these things. Can you imagine what would have happened if Peter had said no? Or flip on his head, can you imagine what would have happened if Jesus were to have shown Peter, right, what was at stake? Like if Jesus said, hey Peter, listen, you have no idea. This simple step of obedience is going to lead to your entire lifetime in following me. I'm going to bring you on the adventure of life. Can you imagine Jesus fast forwarding or showing Peter a prophetic picture of the future and showing him a building like this? This, of course, is St. Peter's Basilica. It was dubbed the wonder or the miracle of the Renaissance. Took 118 years to build. Look, Peter. Look at this. And it wasn't just built in your homage. It was built on the place where you were buried. I mean, look at this structure. Look at this art. Look at these pillars. I mean, look at these people coming to see the place where you were buried. I mean, look at this monument. I mean, some would say it's over the top. But look at this monument that was built just to honor the ground in which you were buried because of the significance and legacy that your steps of obedience had in everybody else's steps of obedience. I mean, can you imagine Peter's shock and awe as Jesus tried to tell him or explain to him, you have no idea where this thing leads. Look at this building. Now, will you take me fishing? Will you loan me your boat? Will you put out a little bit? Can I come fishing with you? And of course, Peter's like, yes. But as often the case, God did not show Peter the full story. God showed him enough to take a simple next step. Verse 6, we're told that when he had done so, key word done, not said, not thought, not prayed, not believed, because faith is always evidenced in action. When Peter had done so, okay? So there's a miracle coming, and this story is about to get crazy, people, so heads up, okay? But before the miracle can become a reality, there's a step. There's a step. And before miracles and before God's faithfulness and before the things you have in your heart, the things that God has put in your heart can become a reality, there's always a small step, this action step that's required to position us in the place that God wants us to be. So verse 6, when they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. Watch this. The very thing that guaranteed their income, the thing that they had invested their entire lives, the thing that they trusted day in and day out to bring in money, to feed their kids, to pay their bills, the security of their future, this thing that we call a net, the very thing that we're going to see that Jesus is going to ask and lay down, the very thing that's supposed to basically be everything, was beginning to break and buckle and bend and rip and tear under the weight of one move of God. I mean, we build our entire lives around things that God could crush or take away in a second. These nets, these things that the control of their happiness and their direction and their ambition was all of a sudden not able to contain the goodness and faithfulness of God. Verse 7, so they signaled to their partners. Remember the other boat, Zebedee and his two sons, James and John. Hey guys, get over. We need some help. So they came and they filled their boats. And both boats were filled with so much fish that the boats began to sink. I mean, I don't know how many fish it takes to sink a boat, but I imagine it's a lot of fish. Now you can imagine, the crowd are probably still around there and they're going, oh my gosh, what is going on? Like, if there was Instagram, there'd be videos, there'd be TikToks, there'd be Insta stories. I mean, it would go viral. People were going wild. I mean, you can imagine the excitement and the thrill and the awe of James and John and Zebedee and Andrew. Everyone's freaking out. Can you believe this? Look at this. We've never seen so much fish in our lives. This is crazy. This is bizarre. Wait till I tell my friends. Wait until I tell my mother. Wait until we, get back. I mean, all this excitement, but something different is happening in Peter's heart and mind. Because in verse 8 we're told, when Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, understand, Jesus was a rabbi, he was a carpenter, he was a master, a sir, someone of respect, a good teacher, a man of God, but something shifted here. Something about this miracle has pointed to the reality of Jesus' true identity. And something in Peter in that moment, recognizing a little bit of who God is, also reflects back to Peter who he is. He falls on his knees and he says, thank you. No. He falls on his knees and says, I'm saved. No. He falls on his knees and he says, go away from me, Lord. See this? Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man. Peter, semi-unbeliever, Peter sinner. Surely Peter can't be part of Jesus' band. Surely Peter can't be part of Jesus' group. Surely God can't use Peter as one of the most important pioneers of our faith. I mean, he just confessed to the fact that he's an outcast, he's a sinner, he's a failure, his whole life is wrapped up in his business. I mean, he doesn't fully see or appreciate God. Surely Jesus can't and won't invite Peter to follow. I mean, it's incredible because now all of a sudden, in this boat half sinking with fish, something powerful happens. It's no longer about fish. The boat is no longer a place of fishing, it's a place of encounter. Peter knows that he's in the presence of someone great. He doesn't fully understand who he is yet, but he knows he's not in the presence of a carpenter, a rabbi, or master. He's in the presence of some kind of Lord, some kind of prophet maybe, some kind of wise man. I mean, he's not fully convinced of Jesus' truth, but something in him witnesses to what's in Jesus. And his response is to confess and say, I'm not worthy. I'm a sinner. I'm not qualified to follow you. I don't even fully believe in you. But again, it was Peter's simple act of faith to take one small step in following Jesus that led to this life-changing encounter. And my friend, it's the same for you. It's one simple act of faith that leads you into a place of encounter that can change your life forever. In verse 9 we're told, he and all of his companions were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken. And so were, here we go in the story, James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. So they're actually partners in business. So they weren't just two random boats, as in Matthew's account. Come on, Matthew, help us out here. They're working together. And so James and John heard everything Jesus said, witnessed the miracle, possibly Zebedee too. And then we're told, here it is, and then Jesus said to Simon, don't be afraid. From now on, you will fish for people. Now think about it. A few moments previously, Simon's like, I can't catch fish, let alone catch people. How am I going to be any good to you? Now he's witnessing this boat overflowing with fish. And Jesus saying, with my help, we're going to fish for people like this. I love how he says, don't be afraid. And verse 11, so they pulled their boats up on shore and left everything and followed him. Now, that makes sense, right? Now that we put together the pieces, like, okay, now, even if you don't agree with Peter's choice to follow him, even if you don't agree with John and James's choice to follow him, I mean, at least you can appreciate and understand how it happened. It's like they had this incredible encounter with God that like changed their life and was going to change their life forever. And as a result, they knew, even though they fully didn't understand, even though they were still sinners, still, in a sense, largely unbelievers, they knew in that moment that whatever we do, we got to follow Jesus. And so they did. I think what's interesting is that we find in this story 4 ways we follow. So the question was in today's message, where do we go now? We find there's 4 ways to follow. I think all of us are in one of these 4 categories, okay? I'm going to come straight from text. Number 1, it's what I call the sit and listen phase, okay? Some of us are in the sit and listen. Like, we're like the crowd, we're like Peter. What you need to do right now is just keep on listening. Stay tuned in for this series. There's 3 or 4 more parts of this series. Make sure you get every single one. If you missed last week, go back and listen to it. Sit and listen. Just keep doing what you're doing. And maybe even consider taking one simple step of obedience and saying, I want to learn more. Why not consider going to our website, Lighthouse Church today, and finding our Alpha Group. Alpha Group is a world-renowned course. It's endorsed by Bear Grylls and many other famous artists and leaders in the world. And it's just a 10-week course to ask the question, who is Jesus? and it's user-friendly, and it's inclusive, and it's really interesting. We don't ask you questions. You ask the questions and Alpha answers. Why not say, I want to hear more about Jesus. I want to hear more. Maybe what I thought I knew, I don't know. And maybe like Peter, you're realizing he knows things I don't know that I should know. And therefore I'm going to know by simply being engaged in the moment and making a commitment to sit and listen. The second way we can follow is by loaning him the boat, right? Jesus said, I don't want to be an inconvenience in your life. I know it's going to cost time. I know it's going to cost effort, but would you loan me the boat? Some of you have been sitting listening for a while. You've been tuning in here. You've been watching consistently. You've been listening. Something's happening. You're not fully convinced, right? You're still trying to figure it out, But there's a hunger. There's a desire in you for more, but you're conflicted because you don't want to be inconvenienced, because we don't like being inconvenienced. Well, my challenge to you is perhaps your next step today is to do next steps. Again, if you go on our website, lastchurch.ie, and click on the next steps tab, there's a simple little form, very simple, you fill out, and we'll connect with you. And what we want to do is give you some more information off the back of Alpha, okay, to help you figure out what is church, what does it mean, how does it work, how do I get involved, and even though it may inconvenience you a bit, it will help you, because I believe it's through taking next steps that we move from a place of religiosity and appreciation to a place of relationship and encounter. So I believe the Holy Spirit is asking you, will you loan him your boat? Will you take a little step? Will you push out from shores a little bit and take your next step? The third way we follow Jesus is by taking him fishing. Okay, by I want to invite Jesus into my world. I don't want Jesus to watch from the shore. I don't want just to appreciate Jesus. I want him to get more. I want to press more into this thing called faith. And again, we have this wonderful part of our church called Connect Groups. And if you go on our website, there's all sorts of Connect Groups. There's all sorts of topics and themes. There's Tag Rugby Connect Groups. There's Craft Connect Groups. There's Bible Study Connect Groups. There's how to find emotional freedom and mental health freedom. There's all sorts of groups. Why not make a decision to go from just watching on Sunday and doing next steps to going, I want to get involved in community. I want to get around other people. I want to put myself in a place where I can keep encountering Jesus and by following him, see my life change. The fourth and final way we follow is by simply leaving our nets. And this is ultimately where we're going with this. And even if you're a Christ follower and you've done Alpha and you've done next steps and you're in a connector, this invitation, this challenge to leave our nets is renewed today, because what leaving your nets means is it means surrender. That we would surrender ourselves to Jesus. That we would surrender ourselves to his will, his desire for our life. We would surrender relationally. That we would surrender academically. That we would surrender professionally, that we would surrender financially, that we would surrender emotionally, that we would surrender our will so that his will can be done. At the core of Jesus' request to step out, to sit and listen, to loan the boat, to drop our nets, at the core of his request is an invitation. And in that invitation is a question. And here's where I'm going as I close today's message. The question simply is, will you trust me? Jesus is asking you, will you trust him? Will you take a small step? Will you take the risk against what the crowd will think, against your own lack of confidence or security, and will you take one small step of faith? My friends, we should never underestimate what one small step of obedience can lead to over a lifetime of following. We see from Peter's example, it's mind-blowing. The question we're asking today is not, have you followed? Are you good at following? Are you winning? Are you successful? These are all the questions of the world, right? Are you winning? Are you successful? Are you the best? Are you the most good looking? Are you the most wealthy? Is your car the nicest number plate? These are the questions of the world. The question of the gospel, the question of Jesus is simply, am I following? And maybe for you, following is sit and listen. Maybe following for you is loaning the boat. Maybe following is taking him fishing. Maybe loaning you is following is dropping your nets. The question is, are you following? Next week in part 3, we look at, what are you afraid of? I'll see you then. God bless.